On today's episode, we're diving deep into the intricate dance of orbital mechanics, from the physics of orbital velocity and centrifugal force to the surprising reason you can see a Starlink train with the naked eye. Discover the thrilling history of the space race that gave us the first satellite, the environmental impact of orbital debris, and a complex geopolitics governing who owns the cosmos, including the legality of space weapons under the Outer Space Treaty. Essential science and history for curious adults. Okay, let's get started. Welcome back to Why's That Dad, the show where we take your everyday questions and dive into the science, history, and culture behind them. I'm your host, Phil, and with me today is my eldest son.
I'm Dominic.
So it was about this time of year 2 years ago that you, myself, and the family were enjoying a bonfire outside. It was dark, and the flames were licking the night sky and keeping the chill away. I think it was you that looked up and pointed at the night sky. I turned my eyes upward and got the tingles you get when you think someone's watching you. Flying across the sky in a straight line were 11 lights, which, one by one, faded. I actually thought aliens were invading us for a minute. Then I collected myself, Googled satellites in a line, and realized they weren't aliens but Starlink satellites. So I guess we won't be having an intergalactic battle yet. It was our first time seeing these Starlink satellites, but after talking to others, we weren't alone in our UFO initial reaction.
That's not really the way it went, though.
What do you mean?
So, we were out by the bonfire, we were doing prayers, and then Cecilia whispered to me, "Dommy, don't look up." And then I looked up. And
Oh, okay. Well, I have a bad memory then. And ever since, you've been looking up in the night sky, seeing how many satellites you could see before going in at night. And they are faint, but they are visible.
they move fast, way faster than a plane, and they seem to shine, like they're giving off a light. It got me thinking all sorts of questions. They move faster than planes, and planes move fast. Why's that, Dad?
That's right. And the answer is way cooler than you might think. It's not just about speed. It's a constant battle against gravity. The fundamental reason a satellite must move incredibly fast is to defeat Earth's gravity and avoid crashing. An orbit is essentially a state of continuous, controlled freefall. We often think of space as having no gravity, but that's incorrect. Earth's gravity is still very strong where satellites fly. A satellite's high lateral speed creates an outward tendency, due to inertia, that must perfectly balance the inward pull of gravity. If the speed is too low, gravity wins, and a satellite falls into the atmosphere, where friction burns it up. The speed required to maintain this balance is called orbital velocity.
So if I threw a baseball hard enough, it could go into orbit?
Yeah, in fact, the earliest concept of orbit was explained in the 17th century by Sir Isaac Newton, using the Newton's cannonball thought experiment. He envisioned shooting a cannonball off a mountain high enough to avoid atmospheric resistance. If shot fast enough, it would just keep falling around the planet.
Wow. But how fast is that exactly? And do all satellites move at the same speed?
The fascinating part of orbital mechanics is that the required speed is not the same for all satellites. It depends entirely on how far away they are from Earth. The rule is counterintuitive. The closer a satellite is to Earth, the faster it must go. Think of it like a marble tied to a string, or a yo-yo. If the string is short, low orbit, you have to swing the marble very fast to keep it from hitting your hand, the Earth. If the string is long, high orbit, you don't need to swing it as quickly. This principle is governed by a precise mathematical relationship. The closer a satellite is, the stronger the pull of gravity is. So its orbital velocity must be higher to compensate. For example, satellites in low Earth orbit, or LEO, like the International Space Station, are only a few hundred miles up. Because the gravitational pull is so powerful there, they must move at the staggering speeds, approximately 17,500 miles per hour, or 28,000 kilometers per hour for all you Europeans out there, or everyone else who doesn't live in America, to complete an orbit every 90 minutes. In contrast, satellites in geosynchronous orbit, or we're going to call it GEO for the rest of this episode, which are over 22,000 miles away, where gravity is much weaker, only need to travel around 7,000 miles per hour. This slower speed is engineered so they take exactly 24 hours to orbit, allowing them to appear stationary over one point on Earth.
Wow, 17,500 miles per hour? That's crazy. Imagine if you went that fast in your car. One thing's for sure, the cops would never catch you. If they moved that fast, then the astronauts on the International Space Station would see 16 sunrises and sunsets a day, huh?
Yeah, they do actually. Imagine that. That must be an amazing view.
But how does it go that fast? In a car, there's a gas pedal. What does a satellite have?
A satellite doesn't have a gas pedal. It has a rocket that sets it in orbit. Typically, multi-stage rockets are used to bring it to the height and speed before the satellite is released. A common misconception is that rockets spend most of their energy climbing high, but in reality, about 90% of the rocket's energy is used to achieve the necessary horizontal velocity, and only about 10% is used to gain altitude. In fact, when a rocket is launching, it doesn't fly straight up for long. It almost immediately begins a gradual turn toward the horizon. This maneuver, called a gravity turn, allows a rocket to use gravity to help turn its flight path efficiently, saving fuel while building up lateral speed. The final burn to establish orbit must be incredibly precise. If the burn is slightly too short, the satellite falls. If it's slightly too long, the orbit becomes too elliptical, or the satellite escapes Earth's orbit entirely. This final adjustment is often managed by the satellite itself using small onboard thrusters.
So a rocket provides its initial velocity. We'll have to do another podcast about rockets someday. But what keeps it going? Back to the car example, if you were to take your foot off the gas pedal, you'll slow down pretty quickly.
But the satellite is so high up there that there is very little drag to slow it down. When the satellite is at orbital velocity, it doesn't need any more acceleration because...
Oh, I know! Newton's first law of motion!
Ah, yes. You see, you do learn something in school.
But I'm homeschooled, and this is part of my schooling.
Ah, touche. Yes, an object in motion will continue to move at a constant speed unless acted upon by an outside force.
Question. What does touche mean?
In fencing, you would say touche if I poked you with my sword.
Oh.
That means you got me.
Oh.
But in the vernacular sense, you would say touche if you made a good point about something. So, touche.
Touche, pussycat.
Anyways, where was I? Satellites in low Earth orbit are constantly fighting a tiny amount of atmospheric drag from the wispy upper atmosphere. This drag slows them down gradually, requiring them to fire their onboard thrusters every so often to boost their speed and altitude back up.
Anyways, about that Starlink train I saw, why do they have lights? And if they break, do we have to go up and fix them?
Two great rabbit hole questions. Why do satellites appear to have lights? Well, Starlink satellites, and almost all operational satellites, do not have any exterior lights, or navigation lights like airplanes do. Carrying lights would be a waste of precious battery power in space, where there's no air traffic to signal to. The bright lights you see, especially when they move in a line, are the result of reflected sunlight. Since these satellites are in low Earth orbit, they are high enough to catch the sun's rays for a time after sunset or before sunrise on the ground. The sunlight reflects off their large, shiny surfaces in massive solar panels, making them appear like a continuous string of slow-moving, bright stars. Once launched, satellites are generally designed to be entirely self-sufficient and do not require maintenance by humans. They are built with significant redundancy to operate without repair. The typical commercial communication satellite, in geosynchronous orbit, is designed to last 10 to 15 years. They don't run out of battery power. They run out of the tiny bits of fuel needed for station-keeping maneuvers, small adjustments to fight minor gravitational and solar wind nudges that keep them in their precise orbit. Once the fuel is exhausted, the satellite can no longer maintain its position and is usually pushed into a safer, distant graveyard orbit. Low Earth orbit satellites, like Starlink, are often designed for shorter lifespans, 5 to 7 years, before being commanded to deorbit, where they burn up completely in atmosphere. The one major exception is the International Space Station, or ISS, the largest object in orbit, about the size of a football field. Because it is a permanent, crewed laboratory, astronauts must constantly perform repairs, maintenance, and upgrades, often through spacewalks. And a fun fact, the International Space Station is so massive and complex that its software and systems require continuous updates, much like a giant orbiting computer. Because it's a science lab with astronauts on it, they are constantly doing spacewalks to maintain and fix it. Estimates put its total cost at over $150 billion. And a few days ago, I read that they'll be decommissioning the ISS in 2030. I wonder what that means for scientific research.
So it sounds like there is a downside to LEO. What are the reasons satellites are put into LEO versus GEO?
There are pros and cons to LEO and GEO, as you can imagine. The simple reason we use different orbits is that satellites are placed where they can best perform their job, which is dictated by physics and economics. It's not about putting them all in a close-up orbit. Just because it's easier to get there, it's about choosing the altitude that makes the mission most effective. An engineer chooses an orbit by balancing mission needs, like coverage and communication speed, with practical limitations, like fuel use and total cost. The specific design of an orbit, its height and speed, is a solution to a problem. As already mentioned, the two most common satellite parking spots are LEO, about 100 to 1,200 miles up, and geosynchronous orbit, about 22,000 miles up. LEO is used when they need high resolution for imaging and spying, or low latency for communications. When the satellite is close, the signal travels at a very short distance, reducing the lag time significantly. However, LEO satellites move so fast that you need a huge number of them, called a constellation, to provide continuous coverage over a large area, making them costly to manage. Then GEO solves the coverage problem. Since the GEO satellite is so far away, its orbital speed, about 7,000 miles per hour, perfectly matches Earth's rotation, causing it to hover over a single point on the equator. This makes it perfect for TV broadcasting and weather monitoring, as one satellite can cover a third of the globe, and ground antennas don't ever have to move. While the initial launch is more expensive, the decades-long lifespan and minimal station-keeping fuel required make the investment economically sound for these missions.
Wow. Okay, so I know that GPS uses satellites. Does it use LEO or GEO?
That's another orbit. Medium Earth orbit represents a compromise. It sits between LEO and GEO, and it's used primarily for navigation systems like GPS. The altitude, roughly 5,000 to 12,000 miles up, is high enough that the satellites cover a large geographic area, meaning fewer are needed than in low Earth orbit. At the same time, they're close enough to avoid the long signal delay of geosynchronous orbit, ensuring the precise real-time communication needed for triangulation, which is what GPS uses.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the choice of orbit is a fundamental engineering decision based on optimizing the satellite's purpose against its fuel budget and the gravitational forces acting upon it.
So you mentioned cost a few times. How much does it cost to launch a rocket into orbit?
A lot, but not as much as it used to cost. The cost of launching a satellite has seen a dramatic shift, primarily driven by advancements in rocket technology. The price is typically measured by the cost to deliver 1 unit of payload mass, the customer's cargo, to orbit. Historically, during the space shuttle era, launching a single kilogram could cost over 54,000 US dollars. That's about 2.2 pounds, would cost 54,000 US dollars. Today, due to the introduction of partially reusable rockets like the SpaceX Falcon 9, the cost to deliver a kilogram to low Earth orbit has dropped significantly, often ranging from $1,000 to $5,000, which still a lot, but significantly reduced.
Maybe I should send something into space.
Yeah, you can.
Although I don't have that much
I can
money.
afford to send your goldfish up there, or
And then they can adapt to live.
someone's got to come up with that idea. Cremation, sending your loved one's remains
Yeah.
up into space. Someone make a killing. Anyways, even for the higher geosynchronous orbit, costs have dropped to around $10,000 to $20,000 per kilogram. This remarkable price reduction is almost entirely attributable to reusability, which allows the most expensive parts of the rocket to be used multiple times, cutting down on manufacturing costs. And fun fact, the term payload refers to anything the rocket is carrying that is not necessary for the rocket itself to function. Its etymology helps explain the term. It literally means the load that pays.
Wow. That's a lot, but still not as expensive as the ultramarine paint pigment cost in your previous episode. $64,000 a pound several hundred years ago. Speaking of that, you haven't mentioned the history of satellites yet. What brainiac came up with satellites anyways?
The history of satellites begins not with a launch, but with a series of theoretical breakthroughs in a fierce global competition. I already touched on the concept of placing an object in orbit earlier with Sir Isaac Newton's cannonball thought experiment. Centuries later, the practical math was developed by the Russian schoolteacher Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, 1857 to 1935, and I'm sorry if I butchered that Russian name, who is considered the father of theoretical astronautics. He was the first to propose the use of liquid propellants and the necessity of multi-stage rockets, concepts essential for overcoming Earth's gravity and achieving orbital speed. Later, in 1945, science fiction author Arthur C. Clarke wrote a paper suggesting that 3 crewed stations placed in high orbit could relay radio signals globally, describing what is now known as geosynchronous orbit. The actual development and launch of satellites were driven by the geopolitical rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, known as the space race. This competition provided the massive funding required to develop powerful intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, technology that could be repurposed for space travel. The first human-made object to successfully achieve orbital velocity and enter orbit was the Soviet Union's Sputnik 1, launched on October 4th, 1957. It was a small, polished metal sphere about the size of a basketball that did nothing but broadcast a simple, continuous radio beep. The sheer fact that the Soviet Union can place an object in orbit caused a political shock in the U.S., known as the Sputnik crisis, and immediately spurred the U.S. to accelerate its own space program, leading to the creation of NASA in 1958. The U.S. Army actually launched a second satellite, Explorer 1, just 4 months after Sputnik on January 31st, 1958. Its primary discovery was the Van Allen radiation belts, a region of charged particles surrounding Earth, highlighting the critical scientific role satellites would play beyond politics. And after Sputnik, satellite development exploded, driven by different mission needs. First in the 1960s with communication and weather, the U.S. launched TIROS-1, was the first weather satellite in 1960, and then Telstar-1, the first commercial communication satellite in 1962, initiating global television relay and intercontinental phone calls. Then in the 1970s, it was geosynchronous orbit. Satellites were successfully placed into GEO, making them appear stationary over the Earth and revolutionizing permanent global communications and continuous weather monitoring. And then in the 1980s and 90s was navigation. The U.S. developed and deployed a Global Positioning System, or GPS, utilizing a constellation of satellites in medium Earth orbit, transforming navigation for military and civilian users worldwide. And then in the 2000s to present, constellations in miniaturization, that's a fun word, constellations in miniaturizations, still can't say it. Constellations and miniaturizations. The focus shifted to massive constellations of smaller, cheaper satellites in low Earth orbit. Companies like SpaceX, which put out Starlink satellites.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And Amazon, Kuiper, launched thousands of units to provide global high-speed, low-latency internet access, continuing the rapid expansion of humanity's presence in space.
I remember Sputnik from that movie October Sky. That line, you know it won't fly unless someone pushes the button, kind of reminds me of you and me. So if some of the first satellites were for the military, are there weapons in space right now? That seems kind of scary.
It is kind of scary. And that's a huge and important question, Don, because it's a mix of international law and a growing environmental problem. So it's important to know the difference between militarized and weaponized space. Yes, every major country uses military satellites for spying, GPS, and communication. But as for weaponized satellites, the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 strictly bans nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction from orbit. No country admits to having conventional weapons in space. So the biggest worry is anti-satellite missiles, weapons launched from Earth that can blow up a rival satellite.
So we have so many satellites. What's the problem if one blows up?
When a satellite is destroyed or breaks up, it creates orbital debris, or space junk. We have over 9,000 active satellites and millions of pieces of junk, all flying at 17,000 miles per hour. Even a tiny piece of junk can shatter a satellite. And that's not just a theory. Back in 1983, a tiny paint fleck hit the Space Shuttle Challenger's window and created a nasty crater. Now the ISS has to regularly perform debris avoidance maneuvers to dodge bigger pieces of junk. There's even a satellite up there right now called Remove Debris that's testing ways to clean up space junk. It uses a harpoon and a net.
That's so cool.
Scientists are worried about the Kessler syndrome, a chain reaction where one collision causes more debris, which causes more collisions until we're surrounded by a cloud of shrapnel that could make a space too dangerous to use for generations. And this is why the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs is constantly working on new global guidelines to clean up space. So, Dom, from a simple question about speed, we ended up talking about physics, reusable rockets, international law, and protecting the space around our planet. You and your generation will be the ones stewarding this frontier.
So on top of the national debt, the increase in retirement age, social security, environmental degradation, and forever wars, adults have had one more crisis for my generation to solve. Thanks, Dad. I'm up for the challenge.
Sorry, pal. That's the way the world works. Not my fault. And here's one last fun fact. There was actually a NASA satellite, Discover, spelled DSCOVR, that is farther away than the moon, about 1 million miles from Earth, where it constantly watches the sunlit side of our planet, giving us those amazing full disk images of Earth.
Wow. So when the next nuke blows up, we can get a good picture of it. Cool.
Wow, that took a dark turn. No one's talking about nukes. Yeah, that'll be a future episode. All right, your turn to quiz our listeners.
Okay, grown-ups and kids, get ready. I have 3 questions to ask you so you can all quiz each other if you're listening together in a car or a room or wherever you're listening. Unless you don't pay attention to it. If you know the correct answers, be the first to post them in the comments section and we'll mention your name during the next episode. If you're too shy, give us the name of your favorite author and we'll mention that. Okay, here are 3 questions for our show. What is the name? Number 1. What is the name of the Russian school teacher who developed the mathematical foundation for modern rocketry? Number 2. Which orbit, LEO or GEO, is chosen specifically because it allows the satellite to hover over the same spot on Earth? Number 3. What is the typical design lifespan of a non-crewed commercial satellite in LEO before it runs out of fuel? The winner from our last episode is Vinny! And he mentioned mint chocolate chip ice cream as his favorite ice cream, so we had some last night.
Perfect questions. We hope you all enjoyed the journey today. If you did, please leave us a 5-star review on your podcast app. It really helps others find the show. And if you want to see more of us, check out our YouTube channel, Contemplative Chaos. We haven't posted a video in a while, but one is coming shortly. Thanks for listening to Why's That Dad?
Wait a second, hold on. I'm supposed to say that.
Oh, sorry.
Wait, why don't I say your lines?
Okay, thanks for listening to Why's That Dad?
Until next time, keep asking why and keep looking up. God bless.
Bye.